Welcome back to the table. Today, Ryan and I have a full review for Splendor Duel. We've played this now a few times. It's a nice little box right here.
Yeah, several times between the two of us.
Yeah, and I've played it with some other people in my life. Plenty enough times to give you a full review, give you an idea of how this is different than Splendor, give you an idea as to whether and if you liked Splendor, whether you'll like this. If you didn't like Splendor necessarily, or thought it was okay, maybe what you need to know about this. So we're going to give you a very brief overview, but we're going to talk about some of the elements of this game that are unique during our review as well. But like Splendor, you're trying to build an engine and purchase a bunch of these cards, and you're working towards points. This game has three different sort of things you might be working towards. You're either wanting to try to get 20 points in your whole display, 10 points in any one color column that you're building, or they have these little crowns now on some of the cards. I think just this one has them right now. Ryan has a few here. And when you get those crowns, you're going to be able to get some of these royals. But if you have 10 crowns total, that's another way it's going to trigger the end of the game. Mm-hmm. And by triggering the end of the game, I mean you win.
Yeah, like that's a big change.
This
from
is
Splendor.
not a you trigger the end and then you finish the round or anything like that. If at the end of your turn you have one of those things, you just won the game.
Yeah.
So that's a big difference, but I think it works pretty well with the two players.
Yeah, I think it does. I think that we're seeing a lot of that in two-player games, like Seven Wonders Duel is the same way. If you hit one of those in-game conditions, you can just flat out win.
Which is fun in a two-player game for me.
It is fun in a two-player game, and I don't think that works in regular Splendor. Obviously, in regular Splendor, it's the first to 15 points, but then you finish the round, and you see who has the most points, so you get a chance to catch up. In this game, it's a little more cutthroat, being 1v1. You have to be watching what your opponent is doing because they could just end the game, right?
Yeah,
like
for
randomly.
Sure. The other big difference here, other than the fact that it is exclusively two players, is this little board here that has all of the tokens that you're going to be sort of taking to help build up your engine. These are filled out completely. There's just as many tokens as there are spaces here. And on your turn, you're mostly taking tokens from here. The main sort of core action is to take up to 3 tokens in a row. That can be diagonal, horizontal, vertical. Continuous, though. There can't be any gaps. You can take up to 3 of those, put them here. You can't have more than 10 tokens over here. Alternatively, you could take just 1 yellow. That's the only way you can take a gold, by the way, is to take it by itself. And that also allows you to reserve a card, just like Splendor. The other interesting thing here are the privileges. Yeah. The privileges are things you're going to be getting when the other player generally does something good. If a player takes 2 pink, which are very rare tokens, in one grab, you get a privilege. If a player takes all 3 the same color, the other player gets a privilege. And if you refill the board before your turn, which is a thing you can do, and the things you're going to have to do when it starts to look like this, the other player gets a privilege. The privilege allows you, before your turn, to hand it in and take any one non-gold token. Again, those gold tokens are only takeable during that reserve action.
Yeah, now the gameplay loop is very similar to what you'd expect in Splendor. You're either taking gems or you're spending gems to buy these cards. And in concept, it is kind of the same. You're buying a card that's going to provide you gems that are going to help you buy further cards. The gem cards that you have in front of you count as gems, requiring you to have less physical tokens, and you're kind of stacking those up to build an engine. That's basically basic Splendor right there, but Splendor Duel does take it one step further because when you're buying these gem cards, they're not just gems. Mm-hmm. They're also giving you special abilities and powers, which to me, that modernizes Splendor.
For sure.
It gives you a lot more satisfying turns because you're actually able to trigger some of these bonuses.
Yeah, I think all in all of those things add up to, in generally, what I think is a better version of Splendor than what they had before. I had never played the expansion, but other than the fact that this is 2-player, which I also think it works better as a 2-player, and I think a lot of people actually played Splendor at 2 players, this one adds just enough to make it feel like, okay, for me personally, it injects new life into the concept because while I liked Splendor and I certainly respected Splendor, the year it came out, I really thought it should have won the Spiel. And everyone was playing it, and it had such a massive impact on the hobby that I think it's a game that deserves that sort of level of respect. However, over time, it
gets dated. I mean,
it
let's
be
honest. Some of those mechanics feel dated now.
At first, it was a great gateway game. It still is a good gateway game, but there's so many other options now. and it is kind of a very basic game. And I think a lot of people, particularly people, more enthusiast gamers, got a little tired of it. The question is whether or not this does enough to sort of lure any of those people back.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where I come in, because I am not a big fan of Splendor, to be honest. And this game does share some of the elements that I don't like about Splendor. There's a good amount of randomness to the cards that come out, whether the engine that you're building is going to get supported. If you're trying to get 10 of one color and then all of a sudden those colors just stop coming up, it can still lead to those frustrating moments, which for me, I know that's what I dwell on when I play a game like this. And I think this is where we're different, David, because I look at it like, oh my gosh, no more blues came up. Whereas you look at it like, oh, a green came up, and those are the exciting moments.
Yeah.
Because sometimes the luck will be in your favor, and you'll flip a card where you're like, oh, I already have exactly what I need for that card. It helps me win, and it has a really cool power. And the game does have those moments, which really you didn't have as much in the basic Splendor. And I can see the value of that, even though I tend to be more negative, I'll admit it, and tend to be looking for certain cards. And when they don't turn up, okay, yeah, that's just the bad luck right there.
Yeah, I just kind of generally roll with whatever's happening. Now, that generally doesn't serve my win-loss ratio very well. But I have fun while I'm doing it. One thing I do want to point out about this, though, unlike the original Splendor, in the original Splendor, and I think this is one big difference that's kind of more subtle than those differences we already talked about, the introduction of these pearls.
Yeah.
There are 2 of these tokens on the board. And a lot of cards, particularly the first level cards, require at least 1 pearl. Now, we have 3 here that don't, but a lot of them do.
And a lot of the level 3 ones do as well.
And a lot of the level 3. So these pearls also have something unique about them in that there are no cards out here that give you automatic pearls. So you can't build an engine that includes pearls, meaning that there's a lot less of the flip a card, oh, I can build that one.
Yeah.
Because you flip a card and oftentimes you might have some of an engine for it, but you may not have that pearl at the bottom. And I do think while you still can flip cards and you can still potentially build them straight away, and that's part of the joy of Splendor is building that engine and going,
Sure.
oh, I've got such an engine now that I'll build this, and on my next turn I'll build this. In a 2-player mode, it just makes it that much more important in those instances to pay attention to what the other player's doing, so you maybe reserve those. Even if you don't want to build them, get them out of the way so the other player can't do them. But those pearls really make it such that I think it limits it a little bit, at least in my opinion.
It gives you more decisions to make as far as like when to take those pearls, when to try to use some of these new powers to steal one if your opponent has 2 pearls in front of them.
Yeah, if they're sitting on 2 pearls, it's something.
Plus, there's 2 other things that I think that they've brought into these cards that are really cool. We now have wild cards, which when you get a wild card, you can choose which row to put it in, assuming that you already have one to match it with. You can add, so it can be any color gem you want. And then we have colorless cards, which is new. They're very expensive, but they give you a lot of points. You'll notice in Splendor, you only needed 15 points to win that way. In this one, you need 20. It just gives you more ways to hit these points. Plus, of course, the crowns. It might seem like it's hard to get 10 crowns, but as you're getting them, you're also getting these royals and you're getting more abilities and more points and things like that as well. So there are, I think, more synergies you can have with your tableau than basic Splendor.
Yeah, for sure there is. And this is a game, though, that it does have that element of randomness. So one game you might play, there may be a bunch of crowns in the opening display. Another game you might play, there might not be any. There's usually some crowns on this top row, but there are only a few cards in the bottom row with crowns, maybe a little bit more in the second row. But the last game we played didn't have a lot of crowns, so no one actually ever ended up getting this. Now, not to mention, Ryan beat me with 10 points in one color, but that's because I wasn't playing I wasn't paying attention, and I should have reserved or at least built some of those blue cards, because the last one he got allowed him to win the game, and it was a 3-point card. And had I been able to, and I was going to reserve it the very next
using
turn.
the gold to reserve it.
Had I reserved it the turn before, the game would have lasted probably another 20 minutes. You probably still would have won, but he would have been hunting for blue points out on the board for quite a bit longer.
And that's the thing about the Splendor Duel version is it is more cutthroat.
Yeah.
Being 2 players, you have to play that way almost. You're watching what your opponent's doing. Less so than basic Splendor, where you could have a 4-player game and it's like, okay, it's really difficult to know what's going to be left or what different people are going for. But in a 2-player game, I can see, all of your options. I can determine kind of if I'm going to refill the board and give you more to choose from, or maybe I don't because you need greens and there's no greens and I want to leave it that way. Plus, with the spending of the privilege, we didn't even mention this, but if you have all the privilege and your opponent earns one, they take one from you.
Yeah.
So all of these things work together, I think, to make this a more cutthroat experience. However, like David said, you don't have to play it that way. You can just kind of build your own thing and whoever wins, wins. But I think some people are going to be watching like a hawk and saying, oh, you're about to win in white. I'm going to make sure you don't get another white card.
And I think that's more innate in a two-player game, obviously. Yeah. I mean, I know I play two-player games more that way. And there's a lot less hurt feelings because most players at the table, when they're facing off with one person, knows that what's good for them is bad for the other.
Right, you're not getting picked on. It's a two-player game.
If it's four-player and you keep getting picked on, you feel like you're the one of the four getting picked on. So that is a big difference. But I think, so in terms of who wants to play this game, obviously if you enjoy Splendor and still enjoy Splendor, I think this is a great variant of that, especially for two players. If you haven't played Splendor in a while and think it is a little long in the tooth, a little old, it doesn't offer what you want as a gamer anymore, I'd give this a try for sure. I would probably have given the original Splendor when it came out. I mean, I would probably rate it pretty high when it came out.
What would you rate this and why?
What I would rate this, I'm going to give this an 8 because I think I'm a big fan of two-player games a la Seven Wonders Duel. But also lighter ones like Jaipur, stuff like that. If you like things like Jaipur, if you want a nice little two-player game where you can just go back and forth really quick over coffee, over breakfast, this is a nice little game that you can do that with. And it's not really complicated at all. This is like one of the easiest games to explain. And I would give it an 8. I think Splendor Duel is the game no one thought they would want.
Sure.
But I think it's going to surprise a few people and go, oh, wow, this is actually maybe the best version of Splendor yet.
So I'm coming into it from a different angle. As I said, as somebody that just doesn't really like Splendor, doesn't really like base Splendor. And I think to the opposite of what David said, if you just don't like Splendor, I don't know that there's enough here that's going to turn you into a Splendor lover.
If you never liked it.
Yeah, like if you just never liked Splendor. But if you're just tired of it or bored with it. But for me, it's a 7 for me. And because it does bring some fresh life into Splendor, it still suffers from some of the flaws or some of the issues that I have with base Splendor. But also, there's so many great two-player games out there that when I look at a game like Splendor Duel, would I play this over Seven Wonders Duel or Watergate, which is my personal favorite, or Dice Throne? Yeah, they're all different experiences, but this is one that I could see getting out sometimes, but it just doesn't, it's not a killer for me. So I think 7's pretty fair from what but I understand your point of view too.
I would guess that over time, your 7 might go to a 6.
As I played this more and more and saw some of the same issues repeated, it might drop over time.
I think 7 is probably a little generous for you. My 8, we'll see if it stands up. I think Jaipur has stood up for me over the years, and it is a very basic game too.
Jaipur is brilliantly simple.
Yeah, it is brilliantly simple, and I think this falls into that same category. So if you like games like that, definitely take a look at Splendor Duel.
Yeah, if you're a two-player gamer, if you play generally with your partner, significant other a lot, or you have that one gaming buddy that you just play with on your lunch break, like Jeremy Howard does, this is the exact perfect style of game for that.
Yeah, and I think also if you like, there's some nuances here that after one play, you might not pick up on.
No, you do need to play multiple times.
There are some things, the way these privileges work, at first you're like, I don't want to be the one that refills. Because like when you refill, it feels like a little bit of a failure because you're giving the other person a privilege. And that's fine. But there are times where you might know exactly what's in the bag. There may not even be many to put out here. But you know that someone just spent,
the pearl,
2 whites or 2 pearls to do, or a pearl to do something. And you know that if you refill it, you're able to get 3 in a row of maybe some of those colors. So some of those things kind of show themselves after a few more plays.
Well, you could do that. It's only a 30-minute game.
Yes.
That's what we're saying too.
If that. I mean, it can be shorter, but it's probably going to be, 30. 30 is probably an accurate read on it. But if you have any questions at all, please make them in the comments below. We'll get down there and answer everything we can. Until next time, though, make sure everyone has fun at the table, and we'll see you then.